Next two forms of ownership are your private limited companies and your public limited companies. Usually a business will start out as a sole trader or a partnership and then build its way up to either becoming a private limited company or public limited company. Key difference between both is that private limited company sell shares to family and friends. They're not in the stock exchange, whereas public limited company, very large shareholders buy their shares on the stock exchange. There's a lot more public interest in your company as well. With being companies in general, you're owned by shareholders now. You have your separate legal identity, which is really good, and the assets are owned by the company, not by the personal individual. So there is limited liability with these. Two documents that you must draw up before becoming a company: memorandum of association and articles of association. Memorandum is all about the internal running of the business, and articles is like the links with the external environment and how that works. With regards to private limited companies, as I said, family and friends, the main shareholders. Key advantages with this: limited liability. You're not at risk of losing your personal possessions, so it's seen as a less risky form of ownership compared to sole trader, and that can mean you're able to take more risks to succeed. You're not afraid of losing your personal possessions. Banks are more likely to lend to you because you're seen as less risky, which is really good as well. However, you're still limited in capital because family and friends are your main shareholders. You can't sell shares to the general public, unlike a public limited company on the stock exchange. So you might be able to gain as much, like for example, economies of scale in that compared to public limited companies. But depending on the case study, some private limited companies can be very large. For example, when I was teaching this, I would have been explaining like Norbrook is the second largest pharmaceutical privately owned business in the world. So they would still have economies of scale even though they're private limited company. Another key advantage is that you do have more privacy in terms of financial information being publicised compared to public limited companies. You don't have to produce in detail annual report or anything. It's just like you just upload your accounts to Company House and they'll have them on their website available to the public. But public limited companies, their reports could go to hundreds of pages, whereas a private limited company could be as little as 4 or 5 pages of their company accounts. So it gives you some privacy and less information for competitors to see. Now, you still can gain economies of scale, for example, compared to being a sole trader. So it depends on the case study coming in with regards to your key benefits and drawbacks. Drawbacks wise, limited in capital. Said you cannot sell shares to the general public, and that's a key drawback. Another key drawback is, and I like this one, that you have to now share profits with shareholders in the form of dividends. So that reduces the amount that can maybe be reinvested back into investment opportunities and things. It could lead to stakeholder conflict between the shareholders and the directors if no dividends issued in that too. So there could be a pressure to share out profits. Also, the original owner will now have less profits at the end of the year because they have family and friends who are shareholders who need to be rewarded for their investment. The reality is though, maybe if you were trying to go with growth, and that again depending on the case study, your shareholders are family and friends. So compared to a public limited company, might be more understand if you're not going to pay out a dividend for the year or two because you're trying to grow. It also means you're not at risk of a hostile takeover because your shares cannot be sold to the general public. So you've control over who buys into your business when you are a private limited company. And that's really the key things coming through with it. Public limited companies sell their shares in the stock exchange. They still have limited liability, so less risk. You won't lose your personal possessions in that, but like a private limited company, you will lose what you invested in. So if I invested in £100,000 into the business and bought shares, I'd lose that 100,000 if the business goes bankrupt, but I won't lose any more than that. They won't come after my house, my car. Why is a public limited company good? Well, you're able to gain a large amount of capital because you're selling your shares in the stock exchange. So you're able to grow and gain economies of scale in that, product development, growth strategies, machinery, new markets. You know, you have that benefit coming through. And banks are more likely to lend to you because if you compare Tesco to a corner shop, like who would you give the £100,000 loan to? When you give it to Tesco, they're more likely to be able to pay you back. So again, all of that goes in the favour of a public limited company. However, because they're so large, usually a public limited company, even though they're able to grow and all, they might experience diseconomies of scale. For example, like staff might become very demotivated, communication issues, coordination issues, because you are so large, and that's a big issue. You should be able to improve your corporate image. Like if you go on to BBC News, Business News, and that, public limited companies are usually always in the news, and being reported on. So it can mean free publicity if you're doing well, and public awareness about your business as well too. And that's really the kind of key things with it. You should be able to attract in further shareholders because the shares are bought and sold all the time. However, big issues with it, obviously the diseconomies, as already said, and like as you grow, become larger, you could lose control of the business. You have to publish your company accounts and affairs in a lot of detail. Said company reports for a public limited company could be hundreds of pages, and you could lose your competitive edge from that. And a lot of details about, for example, financial statements like Tesco that have their ratio analysis, everything in it. But the likelihood is Sainsbury's and that can just go on, look at it and see what way Tesco are going. So compared to being that smaller business and having that privacy, it can be an issue. Another key issue is that you could attract negative publicity if you aren't doing well, or if something happens with your business that isn't seen to be good. The media will usually present on it, and that goes all over the news because you are well known. Your business can be invested in by shareholders, and then obviously that can lead to issues coming through for the business which you wouldn't like, and that can damage the reputation. You could lose a competitive advantage in the market as well. Just be careful if a question did come up on this. You wouldn't want it, if you were asked evaluate becoming or a public limited company if you're already private, key advantage, you wouldn't be able to use limited liability because you already had limited liability as a private limited company. So just be careful on that one. It did come up with Sky. I remember a few years ago a few students used private limited company, but it couldn't be used because obviously the business already had it. So that would be the key things with it. And that's really it with those. Checking there.